Hello, I am Doug Hooker, Executive Director of the Atlanta Regional Commission and a founding Executive Committee member of Learn for Life, the Metro Atlanta Regional Education Partnership. On behalf of my colleagues on the Executive Committee, Frank Fernandez of the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, Katie Kirkpatrick of the Metro Atlanta Chamber, Milton Little of the United Way of Greater Atlanta, and Ann Kramer of Cox Curry, on behalf of all of us, I want to welcome you to the 2021 discussion of the state of education. Learn for Life was founded because education is our collective responsibility. And we can go further in addressing our challenges with equity in education by learning from each other and scaling proven strategies that work. Key business, civic, and district leaders throughout our region are leading this work, and they make up our Leadership Council. Their names are in the chat below, and we thank each and every one of them for their guidance and their commitment. In today's convening, you will hear from district leaders who will share their challenges, and you will also learn about bright spots that are making a difference for our students. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our Executive Director, Ken Zeff, to take us into today's discussion.
Thank you, Doug, and the rest of the Executive Committee for setting this idea of collective impact in motion. But I want to take this moment in front of hundreds of your admirers to recognize you on your retirement this coming spring after a decade of leadership at ARC. Your vision around infrastructure, transportation, water, aging services, and yes, education has helped shape this region to be a more equitable and prosperous home for us all. But mostly, I will miss your steady mentorship and guidance over the past few years. All the best on the next chapter.
Thank you, Ken.
So my role in this conversation is somewhat daunting. Share the state of education during a time unlike any in recent memory. Before we begin that conversation, and for those that are relatively new to Learn for Life, let me take a minute and share the vision of Learn for Life. So who is Learn for Life? Learn for Life represents the 8 school districts that live in the 5 counties of Metro Atlanta. As you see on the map, it's Cobb, DeKalb, Gwinnett, Fulton, and Clayton counties. In addition, Marietta City Schools, Atlanta Public Schools, and City Schools of Decatur. And together, that represents about 600,000 kids, and it's a rapidly growing region. We've added 35,000 kids over the past few years. Very exciting, but the kids coming in are traditionally a little bit more challenging to serve because they come with less resources at home. Specifically around the free and reduced lunch population has grown by 50,000 kids. So our school districts are working hard to make sure they're adjusting to those trends. Learn for Life's theory of action is simple. We bring folks together, districts, nonprofits, businesses, funders, and we learn together. We look at data, we share what we're seeing in the field, both qualitatively and quantitatively, and we find those strategies that are having uncommon impacts for kids. We call them bright spots. We look for those interventions that we can scale to bring good positive outcomes to kids throughout our region. And that makes up the core of our work, finding what's working, taking it to scale. So what is the state of education in Metro Atlanta? The question that brings us here today. Well, at Learn for Life, we look at it through the cradle to career pipeline. We look at kindergarten readiness, 3rd grade reading, 8th grade math, high school graduation, post-secondary enrollment, and completion. And what the research says, if you get those 6 indicators right, your community will be on a virtuous cycle. Kids will be progressing and prepared for a meaningful set of careers and a prosperous set of prosperous job opportunities. Your community will move forward. So the question is, how are we doing? Well, every year we pull together something called the State of Education in Metro Atlanta Annual Report. And that link will actually be in your chat. And that has a compilation of the data from our region, but it also highlights some of the bright spots that we talked about. It shares some of those interventions that we're particularly excited about that exist in our region right now and are being scaled to reach more kids. In addition, we discussed the science of reading, which is a very exciting set of interventions around and pedagogy around what it takes to prepare kids and prepare teachers to move quicker through to move quicker into literacy. You'll get more detail about that as we move through our presentation. But a note of caution as you look at data. This year was particularly challenging. In 2020, Georgia Milestones, the state assessment system, was not administered. And in 2021, participation was limited. It was limited by a variety of factors, all to do with the pandemic. And so as students were in different instructional environments, some at home, some at school, as districts prioritized, rightfully so, their students' well-being, students' education, assessment, and especially the state assessment was not a high priority for everybody. And so the data that we have to take with a note of caution. But we do think it is still valuable to look at that data so we have a good understanding, so we can glean what we can, and we have a good understanding of where we need to focus our time and attention. So what is the state of education in Metro Atlanta on those 6 indicators that we discussed? And you see in early grade, we're still between that 30 to 40% proficiency in both reading and math. We see a spike up in high school graduation. And then as we get down to post-secondary enrollment and unfortunately, as we get to post-secondary completion, only about 3 out of 10 kids are making it through our system with that post-secondary credential or degree. And these numbers represent averages. And should we break these out? And what we do break these out, and we look at by race, and we look at it by socioeconomic status, we look at students with disabilities, the gaps are even larger. And all of this, it's important. Sometimes this data is tough to look at, but it's important that we look at. It's important that we understand the equity challenges that we have, because that charts our North Star forward. So I want to do a deeper dive on 3rd grade literacy, because I think it tells a story that provides insight into the rest of the indicators. We've been seeing growth in 3rd grade literacy. We've been seeing up to 2019, hard work of teachers, hard work of administrators, and the engagement of parents and nonprofits supporting kids. And we've been seeing that number push up to almost 45% of kids on grade level. Then you see the orange line, which represents the COVID slide. In 2021, the number is down to 40% again. We wiped out those gains that we had experienced over the previous few years. Now, again, a note of caution, that represents only 65% of kids that were tested, that orange number at the bottom, when we normally test a much higher percent. But still directionally, what we're finding is that kids are losing ground compared to where they'd been the years before. Our educators worked hard to push up a mountain to get kids to where they need to be, and we have a lot more work to do in front of us getting through this pandemic. So let's look at the other end of the continuum now, and let's talk about post-secondary enrollment. What we see is post-secondary enrollment has taken a hit for a variety of reasons as kids made that decision to enter into post-secondary, but we see that it's down. We've lost 2.5% of kids enrolling post-secondary this past year. We know that's critical as we're trying to get kids to that completion, which is where they need to get to achieve that career of their choice. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the reason for that? Why is post-secondary enrollment falling off? And one of the key factors is something called Fafsa Completion. Fafsa is the financial aid form that students need to fill out to access money set aside for them, money that was set aside from the federal government, from state, from local. In order to receive those funds, they need to complete this form to qualify for that support. Matter of fact, the data says that if you complete your Fafsa, your percent of enrollment chance goes from 55% to 90%. There are no silver bullets, but this is certainly something. This certainly represents an opportunity to accelerate enrollment rates. Now, if we look at the value of that post-secondary completion, that we know that a student that actually makes it through their post-secondary, that 3 out of 10 that make it through, represents $850,000 more of annual income and over $2 million to the state's GDP. It's in all of our collective interest to make sure that kids have that support. So what's happening right now? Well, we see that FAFSA completion has dropped 4% in Metro Atlanta, down from 58% to 54%. That represents 1,100 kids, 1,100 students that were normally completing the FAFSA and then enrolling in post-secondary. We've lost those kids. Those kids have lost momentum, and it's going to be our collective responsibility to figure out how we get them back on track. Now, as we look at that number even deeper, we find that even that pain has not been evenly distributed. Kids who attend high free and reduced lunch school are much less likely to complete the FAFSA. That represents that orange line on the bottom of the chart. They're down to 40%. And the tragedy of that is this is who needs these resources. This is who these resources have been earmarked for. So we have a case where we have a set of resources identified for a group of kids, and we have a process that has become too cumbersome for those kids to access. And as a result, we've lost hundreds and hundreds of those kids who were prepared but are now not entering post-secondary. So at Learn for Life, we've been partnering with our friends at the Scholarship Academy and the United Way to accelerate a program called College Bound. The idea is that if we can train volunteers, bring them into the schoolhouse, work with kids at nights, weekends, even pulling them out of class during the day to focus on the FAFSA to make sure this process gets complete, we can better prepare them for an opportunity to complete this form and access this financial aid. And we understand that getting this financial aid into students' hands is a critical factor to making sure that they have an opportunity to attend post-secondary and ultimately to achieve that post-secondary credential, that completion, which will prepare them for the jobs of the future. As we reflect back on the state of education in 2021, I want to resist the temptation to simplify the range of experiences that both teachers and students have had. But I do want to mention a few inescapable points. The first is interrupted learning has been real and widespread. Districts are learning to live with the virus and kids are back in school, and the American Rescue Plan is helping to provide critical resources. We know fewer kids are making the transition to post-secondary, and that the sudden drop-off of FAFSA completion is an indicator that we all need to pay more attention to. The data is limited, and so the long-term effects of the pandemic are not clear yet. And so as decision makers continue to plot out the future, gathering as much information about student experience is going to be as critical as ever. And finally, re-engaging students is critical. The pandemic has done so much to separate and isolate students from the resources and supports they need. It will take conscious efforts to re-engage them in the work of public education. And this idea of student engagement is the launching point for our next discussion. We know quantitative data only tells us part of the story, and that is especially true in this time when data is so limited. Numbers have the ability to tell us where to look, but they don't give us the insight into the student experience. Only students can do that. And so we're thrilled to be joined by some of the preeminent leaders in our region in public education, engaging with student voice. But rather than taking questions from me, we have asked our friends at VOX ATL, which is an organization centered around student voice and self-expression in Metro Atlanta, to reach out to students and gather questions that are on their mind. And we've organized a representative sample of these questions to spark a conversation amongst our district leaders. So as we dive in, let me first introduce each of our district leaders that will be joining us today. First, we're thrilled to have Dr. Morcease Beasley, the superintendent of Clayton County Schools, serves 52,000 students in the county of Clayton. We're happy to have you with us today, Dr. Beasley.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We also have Dr. Lisa Herring, who is the superintendent right here in Atlanta of Atlanta Public Schools, serving over 51,000 students. Glad to have you here, Dr. Herring. And finally, Superintendent Watson Harris, who leads DeKalb County Schools, over 100,000 kids throughout DeKalb County. We're thrilled to have Superintendent Watson Harris here. So let's dive in. Our first question, and we heard this question from a bunch of different students, was around mental health. And so our first question is from a 17-year-old Zaria, who will share a little bit of her experience.
As a current senior, I've been dealing with the stress that comes with college applications, scholarships, and planning for my future. This stress can aggravate existing mental health disorders and even lead to the development of new mental health disorders, such as anxiety or depression. With that said, my question is, how will you commit to providing additional and adequate mental health resources to your schools that you aren't doing already?
Dr. Herring, let's start with you. I know this is a priority of yours in Atlanta Public Schools. Talk about your mental health services for students at APS.
Thank you, and a special thanks to Zaria for that question. You know, the onset of the pandemic has brought the attention of mental wellness, social emotional learning, and well-being to the forefront of everyone's attention. Just like my colleagues, all of us have made that a priority for consideration. Zaria's question is valid. Traumatization has been real, not just within our community, but in our households. And even as we've returned back to school, we know that that's been a realization from everyone, from the student to our teachers, our leaders, our parents, etc. So to that end, we've been intentional around addressing issues relative to behavioral and mental health supports. And what does that look like? Well, in Atlanta Public Schools, some of the things that we've done immediately, some of it in reference to the ability to utilize CARES Act funding. We've onboarded more mental health and support services workers. And what does that mean? Mental health therapists, additional school social workers, additional school psychologists, as well as school nurses. We believe that that was a necessary investment to ensure that all of our schools had the appropriate access and that the student to social service ratio was appropriate, so that we had more school social workers, more school psychologists to address those issues. That has been a critical and intentional action on our behalf. But in addition to that, we've also been very thoughtful about the practice tied to what we call social emotional learning and social emotional wellness, Across the district, in every school within Atlanta Public Schools, there is a focus on social emotional wellness at the start of the day. One of the ways that we focus on infusing that so that it cascades out is that it becomes a common practice at the start of the day before we get into instruction and any other components of the day-to-day operations. We do a wellness check-in. Teachers do a wellness check-in at every grade level. There's been curriculum training tied to that, continuity of practice tied to that, and to be quite honest, an expectation of our students for that check-in as well. And then one other component that we thought was important that I think is also critical to Zaria's question has been what we call a universal screener. So we've onboarded in Atlanta Public Schools this year a universal screener called a BAT screener that allows for students to answer a battery of questions that gives us a sense of how their emotional and mental health wellness might be from their own lens. And then from there, with that screener, we work intentionally to provide services. At the end of the day, I want to also emphasize that when it comes to wellness, mental health support, relationships cannot be minimized. To actually feel acknowledged and to step into an inviting school environment where people know you by name and by need is just a point blank best practice, so that we know the student and we can tell when they're not having their best day. And all of the things that I've shared also are part of what we believe is important to sustaining and continuing a culture of being focused on the mental wellness and support that everyone needs, from the student to the teacher, so that as they leave us, they've had the appropriate supports to propel them to be successful in life.
Terrific. Thank you, Dr. Herron. Let's move to a question that we heard from a lot of students around life after school. We have Rachel, age 17.
My peers have little to no support from home when it comes to graduating and pursuing post-secondary options. We need some type of accessible, widespread curriculum that provides these students with proper enlightenment and guidance. Our schools have been unindustrialized for far too long. Students need to have options that are not just bachelor's degrees. Students need to be able to put food on their tables. This leads into my question about post-secondary transitions and options. What are the school system's plans for expanding career pathway classes and certification accessibility?
Thank you, Rachel. Dr. Beasley, talk to us about how you're thinking about life after school for students in Clayton County.
Thank you, Ken. And Rachel, just by asking the question, makes some very important points. Here in Clayton County, what we recognize is that not only do we need to provide support to our students while they're with us, but it's imperative that we also provide that support once they graduate from our schools. And so to that end, our post-secondary enrollment department has created the Graduate Resource Hub, and it has very helpful resources that our graduates and our non-traditional completers can take advantage of. Just to name a few, we have information about non-traditional diploma programs. We have opportunities that students can take advantage of beyond high school, even as a request for a high school transcript, how to live on their own, how to get a letter of recommendation, how to write a resume, how to spend some time preparing mentally for a college or a job. There are resources on planning their career paths and their major. There are financial planning resources, workforce planning resources, community and junior college 2-year program resources, and of course, colleges and universities 4-year program resources. There are also special interest programs, and then we should always acknowledge that we will always have a group of students who want to go into the military. So those resources are there as well. And we encourage our students, scholarship resources. They may need a support with how to qualify for NCAA, or just how to stay connected. And even if they decide at some point they need to retake the SAT, ACT, or they need FAFSA support, those resources are available on the Graduate Resource Hub. And we encourage our current students and our graduates to take full advantage of this online resource and stay connected to our post-secondary enrollment department.
Thank you, Dr. Beasley. You know, I feel this common theme that I've been in education a while, this idea of empathy, both with Dr. Herring, meeting students where they are around around universal screener and providing those additional mental health supports, this Graduate Resource Hub. I think that's a theme that's certainly emerging. Let's go to the next question, which is about making schools more inclusive for students. We have Alexis, age 15.
I would like to see more social equity within schools. Acts of homophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism are still being tolerated within schools, and they need to start having consequences. My question for school districts is, how has the school atmosphere surrounding social justice, specifically with race, changed since quarantine and the 2020 racial movements?
Thank you, Alexis. So, Superintendent Watson-Harris, talk to us about how you're thinking in DeKalb around making schools as inclusive as possible for subgroups of students that have traditionally been marginalized.
Thank you for that question, and thank you to Alexis, who is showing one of the most powerful skills of self-advocacy, making sure that her ideas and what's important to her are front and center, and lifting up the charge to the educators to address that. Here in DeKalb County, we have developed our aspirational vision for the DeKalb County school graduate. And that's that our promise to any family or any child who's enrolled in the DeKalb County School District, that they will graduate not only able to go to college, but to attend, excel, and graduate, or to enter a life of service in the military, or to enter a life of enter a family sustaining career. And we do that by creating empowering experiences for our students, as well as removing any barriers to their success. And so inherent in that, we recognize that all students don't travel the same journey. And our first key goal area is that of equity and access. Equity meaning that everyone doesn't receive the same thing, but everyone receives what they need. And access, that we're ensuring that every student and family in DeKalb County is seen for their assets and not their deficits. A powerful fact about DeKalb County is that we have over 185 languages represented. We have the largest refugee settlement in the country. And unfortunately, historically, there have been people and children and families in those communities who have not felt like they are at the center of their learning. So ensuring that we're creating safe centers, that we're creating family impact hubs, even our mobile unit, to ensure that we're going out and meeting families exactly where they are, so that those barriers can be removed and everyone can be set on a pathway to their success.
I love that. 175 languages. I mean, that is the future. That is Metro Atlanta. And it's wonderful to see this focus on equity. Dr. Herring, did you want to add your perspective?
Sure, and along with Superintendent Watson-Harris, I greatly appreciate that question, because I think what our scholars have shown us across all of Georgia, but especially here in the Metro Atlanta region over the past year and a half plus, is another layer of advocacy and and focus around social justice matters, the utilization of their voice to be at the forefront, not waiting until I'm older to speak to where there is a need for a concern or action immediately. One of the things that we thought was critically important in the transition of this administration in onboarding here within the city of Atlanta was what we've created as our Center for Equity and Social Justice within Atlanta Public Schools that very deliberately focuses on the type of work that Superintendent Watson Harris so appropriately identified. Not only defining what equity means, but ensuring that there is an ongoing approach and accountability within the system, that we are approaching all things through the lens of equity. In school systems, one of the things that we can do is have a policy that helps guide equity work. That's something that we've also put in place. But beyond the policy is the practice and then the accountability. So with our Center for Equity and Social Justice, we've created a division that is also guided by the feedback of many individuals in our community. That's not just parents and school leaders, but also the voices of students, whether we're looking at curriculum or curriculum resources, the inequities around what's offered in one school versus another, as well as hearing student voice and feedback around inclusivity and what we need to pay attention to. I believe it's an ongoing conversation that requires great attention. And I think it's extraordinarily powerful when students are at the helm, or more importantly, when students are helping to take the lead. And I'm especially grateful that her question was grounded not just in equity, but also in the area of social justice.
Terrific. And actually, this commitment to equity, I know all of you, I hear it everywhere you go, and I think getting it in the DNA of our organizations and of our city is puts us on the cutting edge, and just not just in the state, but in the region and nationwide. I want to bring in our next question, which kind of picks up on the similar theme. It's from Lenore, age 9, talking a little bit about equitable distribution of resources.
I would probably ask why people at a school in the same county as another school would not get the same privileges as that school.
Dr. Beasley, tell us how we can be sure that all of our kids are getting the resources they need to be successful.
Well, Ken, you know what I'm going to say, from the mouths of babes, right? You all, from the mouths of babes. Isn't it amazing how a babe can see wrong? And I learned that even with my own children, that they know when you're wrong and they can see wrong. And as adults, we have to, of course, humble ourselves and acknowledge that oftentimes they are right because they're coming from such a pure place. Here in Clayton County, similar to what Dr. Herron has shared, one of our strategic goals is about ensuring that students that need the resources get the resources that they need, period. I don't know another way to say it. You can call it equity, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but at the end of the day, we're looking at our data, figuring out who needs what, and ensuring that those resources are shifted or mobilized to help meet those needs. That has to occur in every area across the board. And so whether we're starting out with our beginning of the year assessments, universal screeners, we've got to take this data, and at the end of the day, we've got to do something to address the data. And oftentimes that means mobilizing resources to address that need. It could be people resources or personnel resources. It could be curriculum resources, a variety of resources. But we've got to address the data, and I'm confident, and I feel pretty proud of the fact that here in Clayton County, that equity is not something that we're shying away from. Looking at the data is something that is a priority to us, and we're making those strategic decisions to ensure that we match the needs and the resources wherever the needs exist. And if there are resources, whether local resources, state-funded resources, federally funded resources, we're going to leverage those resources to address that need. And we're going to keep an eye on the data to ensure that we are going in the direction that tells us that the achievement gap, the readiness gaps, that those gaps are actually closing, and they're closing for the groups that need those gaps to close the most.
I love that call to action. I mean, this is our time, this is our moment. We have the resources. Now we just need the political will. And I see a lot of nodding heads, as I often do when Dr. Beasley speaks. Our last question is particularly timely as we talk about the democratic process, and it seems like one of our hobbies here in Metro Atlanta is to vote. And so here's a question from Sanjana, age 16.
I would love to see more civic participation and teaching students more about democracy and civic engagement. How do you plan to incorporate civic engagement and education into school curriculum?
Dr. Herron, do you want to talk about how do we get kids engaged in the democratic process so we have good citizens in the future?
I do. And I really want to appreciate that question, because I think here again, now more than ever before throughout the course of history, we know that the utilization of the vote matters. And the earlier we can start putting that into our curriculum and into the classroom, into the minds of our students, the better. Over this past year, most recently, a few weeks ago, we had the opportunity to do what we call the Rock the Vote initiative, where for several weeks we had a cohort of student ambassadors working with the Arthur Blank Foundation and Georgia Democracy to help ensure that they were learning more about democracy and what it means and the power of their vote. As student ambassadors, those students worked within their schools and within their classrooms to make certain that their peers were even more aware of the electoral process and what that means and the how and why that is so critically important in the American society. Now, that was a small group of school leaders at the high school level who then, in partnership with others, came with all of our high schools. We brought all of our high schools together out in the field, in the backyard of the Home Depot backyard, and we celebrated and pushed in the importance of, by way of a pep rally, students embracing and understanding the power of the vote. Now, we've got students who in all of our schools have recently voted for the first time if they've turned to the age of 18. But we also know we don't need to wait until they turn 18 to educate and inform them in that manner. And so I think to that point, it's an opportunity for growth. That was an initial effort. Beyond our social studies and world studies classes, we really have to be very intentional around communicating to our students not only what democracy means and why that's so important in our society, but also their ownership of it, so that as they come of age to be able to vote, they have a clear understanding. And I think the other part is that they don't have to wait until they're 18 to be proactive in that process.
Can I just add to what Lisa shared? Even with the vaccine and this COVID pandemic,
yes,
getting our kids informed, mobilized, taking responsibility for their own community, sharing opportunities for them to have conversations with their family members, their community, about the importance of the vaccine, to create PSAs themselves, to create videos and other opportunities to get people informed and mobilized to take action. I mean, across the curriculum, across the grade levels, just more opportunities to do that. And, we talk about what school is all about and relevance. That's a word we've heard for many years, right, Elisa? Right, Cheryl? Relevance. Well, please tell me, in the middle of a global pandemic, the message of a vaccine, the importance of the vaccine, please tell me what is more relevant.
Come on, that's it.
So people say, oh, that's getting kids involved politically. Well, hey, it is what it is. They need to be involved because their lives, their families' lives are all involved in this entire process or affected by what we do or don't do, what happens politically and what doesn't happen politically. So it's just time to really rethink how we engage our students and really build it into that curriculum.
Yes.
We know we have a role as educators to, try to remain that neutral voice at times, depending on the issue, but give our students an opportunity to have voice and to be engaged And hey, if it's a controversial topic, whatever, give them a voice. Let them be in. It's a part of the American way, isn't it?
I love the fact that all three of you are leaning into this idea of student voice, student autonomy. It's not we're not students are partners in this world of becoming citizens and educated. We've had some really substantive conversation around equity, around what it's going to take to get our kids to and through high school. I'd love for you each to take 30 seconds and just tell us, what are you excited about? This has been a very challenging time. And we're now starting to emerge from it. What are you excited about from the future? I'd love to start with you, Superintendent Watson-Harris. What excites you about the future?
Well, I mean, this gathering alone is so exciting, giving the students the opportunity to lift up what's most important to them. And I think every time we do that, every time we don't just say that their voice matters, but we actually give them a seat at the table, they are absolutely brilliant and so beautiful, and they have the answers. The answers are in the room. So I'm just excited about continuing to give our scholars the opportunity to tell us what's most important to them, to give us the solutions, and then empower them to be able to actually make the changes that we know they deserve. So,
Excellent. Dr. Herring, what excites you about the future of Atlanta Public Schools?
Well, what excites me most is that we have all learned so much from the last year and a half that I'm excited about the idea of creativity, that we are entering into a space now where we figured out how to utilize technology, co-creation, thought partnership in order to get things done, just like this. So we may not be physically gathered in a space together, but yet here we are. We've utilized technology as a means to continue to communicate. And in the ways of which we found that to be critical over this past year, we now use it as a necessary tool to still communicate. That's exciting to me, not just for the process of learning, but in the space where perhaps we're thinking about things we didn't think about before. And when students do that, and they are then redefining the future, and we're doing that collectively as adult learners and student learners, I can't help but be excited about what's to come, even if the truth is some of that is yet to be named. That's the learning process. I don't know that it gets any more exciting than that. So I'm buckling up and staying along for the ride.
We're happy to have you. Dr. Beasley, 30 seconds about what excites you in Clayton County.
Well, in addition to what my colleagues shared, I would just say I'm excited to see the students, that they're finding their voice. They are owning their educational journey. They are finding creative ways, whether they want to do it face-to-face or virtual, or whether they want to say something about why their community should be vaccinated, or if they want to have conversations about CRT or whatever it is. I'm just excited to see students own that this educational process, this journey that they're on. And I am just elated to say, hey, go at it. Have it. You can do what you want. Do it. Because they're developing the communication skills, the criticality, the collaboration skills, the creativity. It's just amazing to see. So I'm excited to see our students just be what we would want them to be.
Well, let me just say, we are so thankful to have Lisa, Cheryl, and Morcease in this conversation. What you guys are doing is so critical. And I leave this conversation fired up. I know it's a difficult time in public education, but your empathy, your energy, your commitment to equity it fills me with, I'm ready to get back to work tomorrow. So thank you for your time and keep up the good work. We literally are all depending on you. So as we finish up our discussion today, we do have one more section of this conversation that we want to share. And now that we've spent a lot of time talking about our older students, L4L holds this cradle to career approach, and we are really excited about a bright spot in early literacy that is beginning to be scaled throughout Metro Atlanta, and it's known as the science of literacy, the science of reading. And so we're going to share a little bit more about that in our next panel. We are thrilled to be in partnership with our friends at Marietta City Schools and the Rollins Center at the Atlanta Speech School, who have recently begun a bold, intentional strategy to bring this set of tools and philosophy to every corner of the city of Marietta. We are fortunate to have two of the leaders at the center of that work join us in conversation. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ryan Lee James, Director of the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, and a thought leader in this work to give us a brief overview of what is meant by the science of reading. Then we will invite Dr. Grant Rivera, Superintendent of Marietta City Schools, to talk with Dr. Lee James about the progress underway in Marietta. Dr. Ryan Lee James.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is really such a pleasure to be on with you and have the opportunity to talk about this very important work. I'm going to start just by giving a real brief overview of what is meant by the science of reading. The science of reading is a real buzzword now. In education, in the field at large, we're hearing a lot of buzz about it. But what does it mean? Well, the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. Importantly, the science of reading is a settled body of evidence, decades in the making. We now understand that science has informed what we know about reading development, what we know about reading disabilities, and importantly, what we know about teaching reading. What the science of reading is not. It is not an ideology or philosophy. It's not a fad, a trend, a new idea. It is certainly not a political agenda. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a program. That is really important to remember, is that it is not a specific program. And it's not a single or specific component of instruction such as phonics. This information that I'm reading to you guys comes from the whatisthescienceofreading.org. So I just want to share two real seminal reading frameworks here to sort of orient us in our thinking and our conversation. The simple view of reading was developed or proposed in 1986. This model tells us that decoding times linguistic comprehension yields reading comprehension. This is really critical because as we back up to think about what does the science of reading mean? How do we know that we're attacking the components of the science of reading in our instruction? Well, there's one side of this coin that's decoding, and the other side is linguistic comprehension. As you can see on the screen, this formula is a product because you must have both if the child is going to be a proficient reader. This next reading framework that you see on this slide sort of expands those two overarching domains. We like to talk a lot about Scarborough's rope as being real seminal, real foundational to this work. You can see that Scarborough and colleagues, their work sort of expands this work or these two large domains of language comprehension and word recognition. I want to just say we are talking about the science of reading, right? But it's important to recognize that the strands of language comprehension, the strands of language development begin to develop right before birth, when a baby's auditory channel comes online and they're able to hear sound. And so there is this progression from oral language to written to oral. And we know that early on in the 0 to 5 space, or 0 to 3 years old, language comprehension or language development happens in context. Kids learn language just by being in an environment where language is spoken. And reading does not develop that way. A real critical distinction, as we are hardwired biologically for language and not the same way for reading. And in fact, those language areas of the brain and others have to be reorganized or programmed in order for children to be able to read. So these strands at the top, language comprehension, you can see all of the subcomponents here: background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And then word recognition at the bottom, phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. Very important takeaway is that those skills at the bottom especially must be explicitly taught. And so the work the project, the work underway of Literacy and Justice for All is really about bringing this research to life through the third trimester of pregnancy through literacy. I want to take the opportunity now to welcome my colleagues, Dr. Ken Zeff and Dr. Grant Rivera, back to the call, back to the screen.
Thanks, Ryan. And thank you for that masterclass in the science of reading in a mere 5 minutes. I want to welcome Dr. Grant Rivera, Superintendent of Marietta City Schools. Dr. Rivera, you're bringing this to life in the science of reading. You're bringing this to life in Marietta in a program called Literacy and Justice for All. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why you're so excited about that work?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I'm honored to be here with my colleague and friend Ryan, and certainly with all of you. So let's realize that for Marietta City Schools, for example, we start at pre-K formally and go all the way through 12th grade. The reality is that, as Ryan noted, if we're going to address reading proficiency by 3rd grade, we have to build an ecosystem and build a community that addresses it, as she said, going all the way back to the 3rd trimester in prenatal care. So in Marietta, Literacy and Justice for All, what we are doing in partnership with Ryan and her colleagues at the Atlanta Speech School, is that we're looking to build an ecosystem that goes from prenatal third trimester all the way through 3rd grade and age 8. Because the reality is that if we wait until we get to kindergarten to address these issues around language comprehension and word recognition, we will not have proficient readers by 3rd grade. So really it's about how do we mobilize an entire community to make sure that we're setting every child and family up for success.
Ryan, talk to us about why you're excited about this work at the Rollins Center.
Yeah, I mean, the primary reason that we're excited about this work is because of what it means for teachers, what it means for families, what it means for kids, right? Because everything that we're talking about is to impact child outcomes. Marietta is very unique, and in Grant and what he's sort of talking about this work along the continuum, that Marietta has made this commitment to ensure that all child-facing adults are going to be equipped with what they need. So if you're working in the birthing hospitals, you're going to be equipped with what you need to talk to families about healthy early brain development and language development. If you're in the early care and learning center, you're going to be equipped with what you need to know about early literacy development to make the greatest impact in your classroom. If you're working in the kindergarten through 3rd grade space, huge that Marietta is training all of their instructional staff on the science of reading, not just teachers, not just special education teachers, SLPs, those who are working with our English language learners. So if you are working in that space, you're going to be equipped with what you need, all you need to know about the science of teaching reading to ensure success for your students.
This is really bold work. I mean, I love the way you said, Ryan, every child-facing adult is getting trained in these research-based practices. Grant, tell us, I mean, you've been doing this for a few months so far. I know this is a big investment of time, treasure, and talent. Tell us, what are you learning so far? What are you hearing from your teachers?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I mean, the first is around like hope and optimism, Ken, quite candidly. And I think far too often, K-12 has been expected to fix birth through 12 issues. And our teachers have incredible hope and I think feel the momentum that we've moved an entire community, again, as Ryan referenced, from birthing hospitals to child care centers to pediatricians' office, everyone who interfaces with a child and a family. Our kindergarten teachers know that there are 5 years worth of work occurring before them. And I think there's a lot of hope and optimism that we're doing this together as a community. It's not a burden placed upon K-3 teachers only. And I think there's an incredible amount of momentum there. I think the second thing that's been very eye-opening for many of our staff is that as we get inside the science of reading, and I take you back for a moment to Ryan's slides earlier about what it is and what it's not, there are a lot of veteran, very talented teachers. I would probably even say even some newer teachers just coming out of school who are having to really stop for a moment and reflect to say, is what I've been doing in my classroom or what I learned in my teacher prep program, is it really aligned to the very best practices? And whether we're having conversations around leveled readers or sight words or conversations around 3 cueing strategies, there are all kinds of very critical conversations around instruction and pedagogy that are happening in our classrooms that quite candidly give teachers not just hope, but help them with better practices that are having better outcomes for kids. And I think that's for us what's been so exciting here in Marietta.
Off to a great start. I know, Ryan, your goal at the Rollins Center is beginning with Marietta and this deep intervention, but eventually bringing this work across not just the region, but really across the country. What are you learning so far from your work in Marietta that's going to be applicable as you start to continue to scale this work to other school districts around the country?
Yeah, I think what we're learning, and we knew it to be true before, but Grant sort of alluded to it. The work is hard, and if you expect that you are going to do systems level change, you've got to be all in, and that's what we're learning. The work is hard, but when you have the investment from people, it's all worth it. Another thing that we're learning through doing this work is that, which also we I think all of us on this screen and those who are going to be listening also know and believe to be true, that all teachers need access. So I know we're specifically talking about teachers, but all child-facing adults, specifically teachers in the kindergarten through literacy space, need to be knowledgeable about the science of teaching reading. So how can we get them knowledgeable, right? If you're fresh out of your graduate program or you're fresh out of your bachelor's, how do we get you that information, right? It can't be something additional that teachers have to pay for or scour the internet to get. We have to make that science of reading available to all teachers because our kids are depending on it. Quite frankly, when you look at our national data, our country is depending on it. Our country is depending on us getting this information into the hands of those who need it most.
So folks are fired up now. Well, they're like me. They're watching this. They're motivated. They're energized to do this work because I think, as Ryan said, it's a moral imperative. Grant, how do parents, community partners, other districts get involved? What's their role? How do folks get involved in this work?
Yeah, let me answer that question. I think first from a district leadership or school leadership perspective, and then how it goes into the community. I mean, I think first we have to acknowledge the moral imperative. I'll say in Marietta, for example, we looked at the number of proficient readers that we had by third grade, and conversely, the percentage that we did not have. And as we looked over the last several years, listen, the pandemic is not helping those numbers. And at what point are we going to recognize that we have to do something different? I think for us as school leaders, as educators, it became responding to that moment, responding to that moral imperative, and acknowledging that we needed to do things differently. And I think the subsequent part to that, and I'll say this as not just a superintendent, but as a father. So I sat in my kindergartners teacher conference, and my daughter's kindergarten teacher was sharing with me what we should be doing at home with my daughter to make sure that she was developing phonemic awareness and developing that reading brain. And I think whether it's the educators recognizing the sense of urgency, or the families recognizing the opportunity for engagement, or even quite candidly, community leaders who want to lean in and help support this work, whether it's supporting the schools and the work they're doing, families and how we create those connections to each and every household in our community. I think all of this, as you said, the moment is now. The moral imperative has never been more critical. And I think for us in Marietta, and I think for every district in Metro Atlanta, there's a moment that we have to meet. That moment is now.
I think Ryan said it right. I think, Grant, you just reiterated, you need to be all in. This is systems change, and you have to be all in to make this change. And so I just want to thank both Dr. Rivera, Dr. Ryan Lee James for not only modeling and speaking this work, but actually rolling up your sleeves and doing this work. And it is hard. And I think people should take from that this is hard, this is heavy lifting, but real important work like this is worth the lift. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your bold, decisive vision, and most importantly, your action. Learn for Life looks forward to partnering and continue to bring literacy to all children, not just in Marietta, but throughout Metro Atlanta.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, guys. As we conclude today, let's talk about what's next for Learn for Life. In the coming year, we will identify bright spots, scale what is working, and make data available, and most importantly, play our role in making sure that our community's return to normal works for a whole lot more kids. Learn for Life is a shared community undertaking, and your engagement fills us with gratitude. But my first thank you goes to our small but mighty team. Damian and Jordan joined this work during the teeth of the pandemic, and both bring the expertise and commitment to build on this collective vision. And of course, you all know Rebecca, who brings a laser focus on equity and a deep belief in the potential of all students. You all are the engine that drives Learn for Life forward, and I'm grateful to be shoulder to shoulder with you in this effort. And of course, every engine needs fuel. So we are thankful to our investors and donors who provide the support for Learn for Life. A special thank you to the Community Foundation, the United Way, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and ARC, who had the vision to launch this enterprise. You were there at the beginning, and your commitment to equity guides this work. If you represent an org that you don't see your name here on this slide, let us know. We'd love to talk and have you join us in this effort. And finally, thank you to the hundreds of folks that attended a network meeting this year. If you want to join a network, those sign-up links will be in the chat. And if you want to follow our work and are not on our mailing list, that link will also be in the chat below. I want to thank all of the district leaders that helped show the broad reach of this collective impact work today. But a special thanks to our students and our friends at VOX ATL. Your engagement models the best of what we can be as a community. It is inspirational. We are better for it. Our ask is that you stay engaged with Learn for Life. Look for a follow-up email with all sorts of ways to be plugged into this work. These are challenging times, but as we prepare to leave 2021 behind, I'm encouraged by the collective energy and yearning for a new normal. I know our best days are ahead, and we look forward to working together to make 2022 a more equitable Atlanta for all of our students. Thank you for being with us today.